Hello to everyone from Hong Kong to Houston, from Dubai to Dar es Salaam. I've had the privilege of being on many panels in my life as a participant and moderated many, but I have to tell you today I'm very excited. And excited for the reason that we're coming together when the tectonic plates are shifting globally, when international rules-based order is looking more like international rules bias disorder. Where the old legacy order is facing what I call the fiscal osteoporosis of bulging deficit and debt. And when the Washington consensus finds itself backpedaling from almost all of the sustainability goals, all of the ambitions, the virtues lectured, and all the international norms are being even challenged, whether it's in punitive arbitrary tariffs, sanctions, or preemptive strikes of late. I recently wrote a piece in which I said the United States is facing a crisis of 4C. In diamonds, it's carrot, color, clarity. But in case of United States, it's credibility, crisis of currency, commerce, character, and credibility among friends and foes, allies and adversaries. So with this background, and 12 years later of the initiation of BRI as a initiative and the largest alternative undertaking to the status quo, I'm joined by an outstanding panel today. And the reason I say that is that they are so diverse in their backgrounds. A former banker who's been through the thick and thin of BRI. If somebody knows what's happening in the world of finance, we have Mukhtar with us. A Chinese scholar at the heart of sustainability who understands where the world is going in that context, and a geopolitical strategist and a co-founder from the heart of Europe as Hussein. So consider today as an MRI of BRI. So we're going to conduct an MRI on BRI. Some housekeeping notes. I'm going to shortly invite my panel to kindly introduce themselves, their areas of expertise. Share your questions in the Q&A box. We try to address as many of them as we can. And despite the fact that we're going into a changing world order, certain things don't change. So ladies first. Zeying, why don't you kick off by introducing yourself, followed by Hussein and Mukhtar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. And thank you, everyone. And thanks for the great opportunity for me to be part of the dialogue on very timely issues. I'm Zeying Wu, and now actually working at Lingnan University in Hong Kong as a research assistant professor. I received my PhD, back at Boston University in the US, and I have been working with Professor Yeming from the Pardee Schools of BU on the latest developments of BRI. So my sharing today actually is based on my joint research with her on particularly about the Green BRI initiative. So I look forward to actually exchanging views with the panelists and Ali, and I also look forward to hearing from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeying. Hussein?
Thank you, Ali. I'm honored to be within this special event, the Global Institute for Tomorrow. What a wonderful description of such a great think tank and research center. So my name is Hussein Askary. I'm born and raised in Iraq. I was born in Baghdad, and until I finished my education as a translator and interpreter. I survived the civil war in the 70s in Iraq. I survived 8 years of the Iran-Iraq war, and I survived the first Gulf War, which is called the Kuwait Liberation War. But when I went to Europe in '92, and joining and learning from the International Schiller Institute, I realized that besides justice, economic development is the key to security and peace. And in that sense, I started to study economic and strategic matters independently. In 1996, I joined a team of, maybe you don't see this, to publish the first ever, I wrote a chapter on this special report. It's a study of the Eurasian land bridge the New Silk Road Locomotive for Worldwide Economic Development. It was published in January 1997, and it has all the maps and how to connect Eurasia and also Africa with infrastructure. The irony was that we wanted France and Germany to take the initiative at the time, but they were busy with other things. When the Belt and Road Initiative was announced in 2013, we were celebrating, and we published another report. It's called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, which is 400 pages. It covers the whole planet, including the Americas, how to connect all the nations of the world with infrastructure specifically. But in 2018, we started here. We realized that there is an enormous lack of information about the Belt and Road Initiative, but also there's a lot of disinformation. So we started the Belt and Road Institute to give people objective information, but also to debunk some of the mythology around the Belt and Road, like the debt trap. In that process, I became an expert on debunking the debt trap. I developed a method to do that in 3 steps, which I can share with you. So this has been my area.
Well, Hussein, having survived all of those 3, may you teach us about survival skills at some point as well. God bless you. Thank you for being with us. Mukhtar, to you now.
Thank you very much, Ali, and allow me to kick off by thanking Chandran and his team for the invitation to join you today. My background is really one largely in finance. I spent 40 years being a banker. I had the great privilege of working for HSBC throughout my career. And the world's a very interesting place where you sit on the shoulders of giants that have been operating in many of these markets over many years, and you see both the macro picture and the micro picture. I had the great privilege of working with many distinguished colleagues. And I suppose my exposure across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and latterly in Asia, was particularly important because we saw BRI both launched and we saw the early challenges that it faced as a financial institution. And of course, as a global financial institution, it was very important that we took a responsible approach towards how we would tackle the opportunity and indeed the risk that BRI represented. And Ali, I look forward to sharing some of those experiences with you during the course of this dialogue.
Thank you very much. I'm excited. I thank you all for short introductions, but ever for meaningful. Let's continue with you, Mukhtar. There's this old saying, as it goes like, cui bono, follow the money, who's benefiting? Can you shed some light in 5 minutes for us on the background of the tectonic shifts in and around the world of finance, the ramifications, implications between the past 12 years and now, with the arrival of BRI, and in context of all of the sanctions, asset seizures, and how you see this web in the world of fractured finance and a fractured world? Can you elaborate on that and set the stage for us?
Well, perhaps, Ali, the place to start might be just to provide some historical context around, the generic thematic of infrastructure finance. And if you just look at the data points, whether they're from 10 years ago or whether they're from now, there's a consistency in what they point out repeatedly, which is that the demand for infrastructure finance, particularly in the global south, is completely submerged in terms of size by the available lack of capital. And that lack of capital, whether it comes from the conventional markets, from the DFIs, or from governments, simply can't meet that demand. And that was the case, by the way, before 2013. If you look at it now, in reality, around $3 to $4 trillion of capital is required to meet the existing requirements for infrastructure. The BRI probably has provided about $1 trillion against that figure of 4. And other initiatives from Europe and the US have contributed more moderately in terms of size, about 300 billion. but they've contributed a lot in terms of rhetoric and in terms of pushback against this initiative. So I think just painting the picture, infrastructure is going to be a consistent requirement of the world, irrespective of the geopolitics. Finding that capital and mobilizing that capital remains one of the key challenges we have. And I think the BRI has served a very significant purpose in terms of mobilizing more capital in a shorter period of time for countries which are particularly needy in the global south.
Thank you for that. That sets the stage. Last year, I was speaking in Montreal, and my fellow panelists said, oh, you know, America still leads by the culture, and we bring the cultural dominance. I said, you can bring Britney Spears, I don't know, Taylor Swift, but Chinese will bring the stadium because people still have to gather and watch the concert. On that note, can you elaborate a bit on this 53% reported by FT of late? That China's own cross-border transactions, including trade, financial flows, and internal transactions, are all in renminbi. That's a massive uptick. It's up from 40% in 2021. And in that context, given everything that is happening, are we moving from TINA, there is no alternative, to a TIA, which is there is an alternative, and how quickly that alternative may manifest itself?
Well, I think, Ali, look, I think firstly, the growth of the RMB has been ongoing for decades now. It's been a very measured process. It's very closely tied to obviously the trade figures, and as China has globalized its footprint, then the ability to use its own currency both domestically and cross-border has increased. So I'm not surprised at the 53%, and one can firmly expect that to increase. I think the more interesting question is, can the RMB be used for important global commodities such as oil? And is that a future trend that we are probably going to see? And I believe that that will be the case. But I think this is a slow, steady progress. It's not a revolution overnight, but it's certainly very encouraging for China domestically that that the use of the RMB is now more prominent. And I think that also is important for the domestic Chinese market, particularly in terms of managing savings, and how that RMB is deployed once it's generated.
Now, when you look at BRI, Mukhtar, in many cases, China acts as a boot operator, build, operate, own, and transfer, and an off-taker. But the plumbings of the financial world. Can China benefit from bringing some of these projects into a refinancing model, whether it's private capital, regional funds beyond, the multilateral financial large institutions like NDB or AIIB? And for that, what has to happen? And if that happens, how will that accelerate or affect BRI's development?
Look, I think it's essential for China to demonstrate as frequently as it can that BRI is an open, inclusive project, that one can participate in financial institutions if they're satisfied with the risk-reward structures, that they have every opportunity to participate in BRI financing. But I think people often come to a shuddering end with the word financing. Let me remind everybody that financing is the beginning of the process, not the end of it. So, once you get the financing in place, then some consideration needs to be given to refinancing. Some consideration needs to be given to crowding in more diverse financial structures. It's not just debt. Equity is important. Funds are important. The ability to mobilize capital ensures that you get a much bigger bang for your buck, rather than everything in effect being either equity financed by governments or debt finance, in which case, you run the specter of the kind of debt trap diplomacy debate that we were having earlier on. So I think that, my belief is that over time, BRI will attract more sources of capital. And Ali, I would leave you with the thought that, there are probably around 2,500, 3,000 BRI projects that have been started since 2013. I would suggest that at least 20 to 30% of them have been completed. they have cash flows, they have operators, and that provides normally an opportunity for financial institutions to think about what can they do to support that growth, because a lot of the risk of completion is out of the way, and it's the risk of operation that they're financing, and those two risk profiles are very different. So I do think there is an inventory of BRI projects which are now in the completion stage that lend themselves to crowding in new sources of finance.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. We will definitely come back and revisit the elements of finance, as you rightly said. I always think as finance as the oxygen. It has to go into the lungs, and then you can decide how to gonna exhale and bring the rest of it. But talking about oxygen, we also have to talk about environment and about the climate. And I would like to bring Zeying into the conversation to elaborate a little bit around this Green BRI, because we've been into virtue signaling in the West. You know, there's a lot of talk, but we see backpedaling with the arrival of President Trump in the office from a lot of initiatives. In 2022, 2023 alone, China spent $890 billion on green initiatives. So when you look at it, Zeying, and you look at the footprint of BRI, how significant, how important, and how central the Green BRI has been, and is this part of the fabric of BRI as this initiative expands into the global South? And if that is the case, how will that make BRI a different initiative comparing to Global Gateway or Build Back a Better World and the rest of it?
Yep, thank you, Ali. That was a good lead-in. So the Green BRI didn't start, from the very beginning, with BRI. So the latest developments of BRI is much about green development. But the BRI is great. We have fantastic infrastructures, great financing, and really helping a lot of developing countries thriving. But there is one downside of the early stage of BRI, which is about actually its environmental deficiency. So there was a lot of international criticisms about the early BRI projects that actually brings a lot of environmental issues in host countries. And to address this question and problems, the Beijing launched green development under BRI in 2017. And things didn't go actually fantastic all of a sudden or actually immediately. It's actually started with little implementation in its early stage, mainly because of three reasons. One, at the very beginning, there was lack of the participation of private green industries from China, because the green companies were attracted to the advanced countries. There you have more luxurious market. So profit-driven private company went to Europe or actually North America. And so the Green BRI was actually mostly involving the local governments and state-owned enterprises. And local governments, some of them, particularly those bordering BRI countries, they actually may not have share exactly the same, political objective or actually economic priorities with Beijing. So the actual implementation of the Green BRI has limited output. But things got changed, surprisingly, during COVID and actually after COVID. And we witnessed actually sudden growth of green exports and green investments from China to BRI countries during COVID and post-COVID, and it is still ongoing. And this shift actually occurred for two factors. One, the global trade interruptions caused by COVID. And second was the US impositions of tariffs, significantly increased tariffs on China's green products. So these two interruptions actually brought private companies, Chinese private green companies to realign their commercial interests with Beijing and to promote green development under the BRI. Therefore, actually leads to the substantial growth of the GBRI, and this growth, hopefully would lead to more substantial implementation and more substantial outputs on green protections and green development in the host country. Yeah, and this was our research finding. Overall, our research finding point to the fact that the developments of BRI and currently the Green BRI is contingent upon the dynamic between the state and private sector against the backdrops of geopolitics around the world. So it's not, just simplistic pictures or state-centric projects. Private sector, civil society, all actors in the host countries count towards the effects of the BRI. So well, later on, perhaps, we have more elaborations on this, but I will stop here as a brief introduction.
Well, thank you. No, I'm happy that Mukhtar is here as well. A great deal of discussion these days is about the future of finance, the central bank digital currencies, the role of AI. So I have a question for both of you. And, this shift, technological, financial, and geopolitical, will have ramifications on the pillars of architecture of money, where I would like Mukhtar to say a few words about where are we going with CBDCs and the future of decentralized finance in context of BRI. And as well, from an energy point of view, Zeying, if you could talk about that, given the sheer scale that China has invested in the value chain, in the entire value chain, from upstream to downstream, does that create, I would say, a BRI advantage for China to take these countries, as much as, for instance, in Kenya, the legacy telephone systems didn't exist, and then, M-Pesa, and then they came and they jumped immediately to mobile. Are we going to witness the same jump on green initiatives because of China's role tied to the world of finance? Mukhtar, why don't you kick off on CBDCs and the future of digital currencies, and then we bring in Zeying.
I think, Ali, digitalization has been underway obviously for some time. It's now reached a level of maturity where some of the legislative rails are now in place for people to feel more comfortable in the use of that currency. The involvement of central banks gives a level of authenticity and rigor to the introduction of digitalized currencies as part of the payments framework. I think I would probably, Ali, hesitate to suggest that digitalized currencies are going to suddenly form the backbone of BRI, because they're not. I think what they form is an option where that option probably at the early stages is more relevant to the retail market than it is to the wholesale market. So people can pay electricity bills, they can use it as a mode of settlement, as opposed to raising large sums of money through the digitalized market, which at this point of time doesn't really have the scale and it doesn't have enough operational expertise to perhaps support some of the bigger BRI transactions that we alluded to earlier on. So I think it's very much work in progress. I do think it will become stronger and more stable over time. But I think we have to manage our expectations about how quickly it will reach that stage of maturity.
Okay. And Zeying?
Yeah, thank you. So I think money is important, but money is not everything. Particularly, money doesn't always lead to good results. So I guess the answers from my side is very much depending on, despite the increase of, financing in the green development from the Chinese side, I think it depends on how the money is used and how the money is received in the host country. So there has been improvements on how Chinese actors use money in the in promoting green development in BRI countries. So there has been guidelines issued to regulate those very specific practices and investments, make sure that there is no greenwashing, there is strict following the international standards and local standards to protect the local environment. So I think the Chinese has been trying to better use the money, but there is still problems in materializing the expected output. There is still a lot of challenges in the host country. Our research actually found that there is still relatively weak local governance on environmental protection. There are still limited regulations on this, right? And there is also limited involvement with the civil society, the local people in the decision-making process. But they actually receive the direct effects or side effects from bad practices. So I think all this actually require better coordinations between among the Chinese actors and host actors, but also perhaps in the future China need to provide trainings for local governments or actually local actors to have better practice in green development and green governance. Governance actually is one new area I think China hasn't been focused on, particularly the BRI project has not been particularly, talking about or practices, although there has been a lot of training workshops for officials from developing countries. But I think this can be, further improved in the future, and the Chinese government and the whole local governments in the host countries can better collaborate on this as well to improve their governance capacity.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we will revisit the dialogue of environment and finance in a few minutes, but I'd like to thank Hussein for his patience, and I'd like to bring him in because I think all of these things are happening at the time that geopolitics is the foundation of many of these developments. We live at the time, Hussein, that I think despite the packaging of worries about non-proliferation, the West's concern is proliferation of trade, new trade routes, the new trade corridors. And in that light, West Asia, also known as Middle East, has been at the center of it, not only because you're an Iraqi national, but European global citizen. Can you take a few minutes in highlighting this complex web of I2U2, India, Israel, United States, and United Arab Emirates, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, and how these things dance in this dance of cloak and daggers and seven veils with BRI, and how will that affect the ambitions of BRI for connecting the heartland all together?
Yeah, well, I will put it in the context of the larger question, which the whole purpose of this webinar is that we're in the future of the Belt and Road Initiative. By the way, I'm writing the second volume of my co-authored book, Extending the New Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, and it's being simultaneously translated to Chinese, so it will be released in November in both English and as you said, West Asia, the so-called Middle East, have become a central part of this. But let me just say, I use this saying a lot because the question is, what is the future of the BRI? And I think the best way, the saying goes the best way to predict the future is by building it yourself. And I think this illustrates China's economic development philosophy, this long-term plan where China wants to be in 2049, and building it itself. And the Belt and Road Initiative, in the same way, will be determined by this symbiosis between what China wants to be in the future and what China's partners also want to be in the future. But unless we have a a cataclysmic event on the planet, like if we have a third world war fought with thermonuclear weapons, or we get hit by an asteroid, a massive asteroid, which will wipe out life on Earth. If these two things don't happen, the Belt and Road Initiative will become bigger, more dynamic, and more colorful. It will become bigger because more nations will join it, and it will also incorporate other dynamics like the BRICS, where China have a leading role, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other structures. We just recently saw the China-ASEAN GCC Summit, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the China-Africa Cooperation. All these things will make the Belt and Road more much larger. The dynamic is, as I said, China's own growth. I was in the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative in Beijing, where President Xi Jinping spoke, and he said, China will only do well when the world is doing well. And when China does well, the world will do even better. So we have a dynamic now where China, through the Belt and Road Initiative, is contributing to creating new Chinas in all Asia and Africa, but smaller Chinas, where industrialization and modernization is the goal. It's not simply survival, but industrializing these nations. I can give many examples. So, if the time allows, like from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, Ethiopia, we had our friend from Nigeria discussing these, but things are happening already now where the Arab countries, African countries, and Asian countries are becoming more valuable for China than the United States and the EU. So that's the dynamic. And it will become more colorful because other contributors will come in. And it's the question of financing is very key, where we see that the BRICS New Development Bank, and also now we have the sovereign wealth funds of the Gulf Cooperation Council and other nations are now contributing to building infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and bringing their resources to the table. And that's why it will become more colorful. Now, as you mentioned in your question, of course, the geopolitics is the most destructive part. We saw what happened in Iran. And I mean, if you look at Iran, you can take two scenarios where Iran is a massive country. It's very central geographically. It has enormous resources, including human resources, something which people don't really know. Iran is one of the most advanced in terms of education, especially in the STEM area, science, technology, and engineering. Iran, despite all the sanctions imposed on it in 40 years, has one of the best infrastructures. I traveled in Iran. I was in Iran in May or, before this, and I saw the infrastructure. It's much better than Iraq, for example, which has been under American, British control the last 20 years. The healthcare, the education, the scientific ambitions of Iran. Now, imagine if there are no sanctions. Imagine if there's cooperation with Iran, where Iran can both export but also import technology. Iran will explode in terms of economic growth, and it will contribute to the whole region. So you have this geopolitics now. There are these ideas that are floated by the Western players that geopolitics is some sort of a disease because it's based on zero-sum game, which is not real. It's not scientific. This idea that if somebody becomes powerful, you will automatically become weak, or somebody becomes rich, you will become poor. This is in the world of limited resources, which does not belong to human society. Human society's most important resource is the mind and scientific and technological progress. This is the most important source. Geopoliticians, they believe in physical assets, oil, gas, coal, geographical location, and they think that's the most important. And therefore, all these ideas about the Build Back Better world, the EU's global gateway, and the India, Middle East, Israel, EU corridor, which we have seen has become a major disaster. It was buried under the rubble in Gaza right now, and it does not work because the premise it's based on is geopolitics and zero-sum game to undermine China. China is already involved in all the projects the India, Middle East, EU corridor is talking about. the railways, the ports, the industrial zones, and all these things. China is already there. So why not work with China instead of, trying to undermine China?
Well, I like to bring Mukhtar in again with both of you, because I think I wrote a piece a few weeks ago. I said in this Belt and Road Initiative, I know it's a sea belt and the road, but I said Iran is very much the buckle of the belt. So and if Iran and Iraq and that patch of land of Mesopotamia is undone, perhaps this belt is not going to hold that tight. The key question I have for both of you from a world of finance and from a world of geopolitics is there is very little agency, at least on surface at the moment, among the GCC that if they have to take a side, they will, let go of Huawei and go with Microsoft or other AI decision makings. When the push comes to shove, Mukhtar, and there is the world and talk of sanctions, President Trump is very mercurial at the moment, talking about taking Greenland, Canada. How do you see the threat of sanctions, asset seizures of the GCC at large, if they don't play ball, in the context of BRI, and the geopolitics of it, Hussein? How pragmatically do you think China is going about it? And what are the options? You're either with us or against us in this competition for the heartland.
Perhaps I can kick off. I mean, I think to your question around the imposition of sanctions in the GCC for trade or other activities and other countries, I think that's a reality actually most countries have been with and navigate that fairly carefully. Do I think that we're going to find perspective? I think that want to try and maintain, however best as they can, an equality between their relationship in the East and their historic relationships in the West. And we must never forget that actually the future markets, particularly for hydrocarbons, are predominantly in the East. And so to that extent, they've got to find a way of navigating that path. But at the same time, they've got to find a way of also making sure that they don't trickle over the edge, as they say, into finding themselves, at the displeasure of global bodies. But I do think one of the challenges that the financial system faces, and it's a broader challenge, Ali, is when you weaponize currency, when you weaponize sanctions, right? That's going to create, an imbalance in how people look at things. I think in a world which was quote unquote less weaponized or not weaponized, free choice would dictate that they dealt with both sides, which is we've got to try and find a way of finding a peaceful equilibrium at a time of very extraordinary tensions both sides.
Thank you, Hussein. And you, from a lens of geopolitics?
Well, I think I would like to focus more on economics here, but the Gulf Cooperation Council, they have been trying to balance their relationship, but there is a reality, something which people forget about. If you look at trade between Saudi Arabia and China in the last 20 years, it went from $3 billion per year to $160 billion per year, at like more than 30-time increase, while with the United States, it has stayed at the same area. But it's not simply trade. The Gulf Cooperation Council, like many raw material exporting countries, have been shocked many times when the oil price dips below $30. They go almost bankrupt. And they want to diversify. They don't want to live in that reality. And therefore, they have embarked on an industrialization process, but also investment process where they use their sovereign wealth funds, which in the Gulf Cooperation Council is about $5 trillion. This is enormous wealth. It was traditionally invested in British, American, and European banking sector, real estate, but now they're diverting part of that wealth to physical economic projects at home. No, people don't know that Saudi Arabia is becoming an industrial powerhouse. I will give you just one example. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund financed a project with the Chinese computer producer Lenovo to build a laptop production plant in Saudi Arabia for $2 billion. So this is where the money is being used. Saudi Arabia is working with China to build massive petrochemical industries. So the value of a barrel of oil is not $80, but it becomes $800 or $8,000 instead by transforming it into other products. This is the reality. And also many nations in Africa, they say, like Zimbabwe, say, we are no longer interested in exporting lithium. We want to build battery factories here. And who responded? China said, well, we can build the battery plant in Zimbabwe. So this is the dynamic of reality. And they try to pretend that the American threats don't exist. And they are working slowly with China to intensify that cooperation, parallel with keeping their relation with the US open.
That's very interesting. I'm still of the opinion that what Mukhtar said has sent shivers and down the spine of countries. When you seize the assets of Russia, 300 billion, and you start becoming, very arbitrary in your treatment of global capital as a custodian, that can change the things. But talking about cobalt and talking about lithium, Zeying, China is at the heart of processing rare earth minerals. And a lot of countries that it's involved in would be, overlooked, ignored. At the time that Theresa May was in office, she went to Kenya after about 3.5 decades as the first prime minister, not having visited Kenya, which is part of the Commonwealth. You think about it. So a great deal of this regret that why China is here, why China is there, is when you don't show up, other people will show up. Is China in a position to not only help the upstream, not only to bring the industries, but to hold the hand of these nations in developing their sovereign wealth funds from the minerals that they have? Is that something, I know it's a twisted question for you because you're coming from the pure environment of it, and maybe Mukhtar or Hussein would like to weave in as well, but can China lead in a different, even more holistic way of saying, hey, I am investing, I am taking your lithium, I am processing it back in my country, but let's look at your long-term sustainability and well-being, and hold the hand of Canada Teachers Pension Fund, hold the hand of Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and help you to develop that holistic financial, I would say, core muscles as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a great question. Perhaps, well, beyond my knowledge. So definitely, the other two panelists do join in, okay? But I do actually, I think I can say about this from the policy kind of perspective. We have done, kind of consistent analysis of official policies about, the Green BRI in high quality development under actually BRI. So there is one differences between the current recent actually GBRI policies and the previous one. In addition to the focus on environmental sustainability, financial sustainability was very much emphasized. I think this was actually one of the keywords in the white paper on BRI recently issued. So I don't think China actually is fully responsible for the financial stability of the host countries, and because China actually insists upon the non-intervention diplomacy, right? So this actually would put some constraints, institutional constraints on to what extent China would intervene into the local governance or actually the financial stability of the host countries. But China, at the moment, at least on policy level, do have an intention actually to make sure that, the investment is sustainable, the money will be well used. We follow certain, regulation on environmental protections, but on other actually local regulations as well. But whether the the host country can really actually stand on their own foot and then run the projects, in a very long-term and sustainable way. This actually, I think, is contingent upon a lot of factors beyond China's, control. But I think Beijing does have the intention. There is, policy announcement on this already. But I think on the implementation level, it is actually a contingent upon a lot of factors, and the non-intervention policy diplomacy will really actually constrain China's levels of intervention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very, very helpful. Hussein, I want to pull you in on that, not from the context of that China should interfere, but China should, help them to develop that backbone. And there's a beautiful case in some of your work that, Oil for Food program, which we know the results and the famous interview of Madeleine Albright, versus Oil for Reconstruction program in Iraq, that, it was 15% of the revenues from the oil and 85% as a soft loans from China. So can you elaborate on some of those dynamics and how in this context China can be not only an infrastructure developer, but a custodian or a mentor, for lack of a better word, of how these countries...
I think I would use the term enabler. It empowers nations to leverage their interests. This concept you mentioned is very, very key in my research on how the nations can leverage their resources, natural resources, financial resources, to contribute to the building, not only China. And this was an agreement between Iraq and China signed in 2019, whereby China buys 1 million barrels of oil from Iraq every day. So the brilliant idea of the Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi, who was the oil minister before, is to take 10%, 100,000 barrels of oil, the money from that, to put it in a fund where Iraq contributes 15%, Chinese banks, with the support of Sinosure, puts in the rest of 85% to finance infrastructure projects in Iraq and industrial projects in Iraq. And Iraq will pay back, mechanically every day back these loans over a period of 20 years, and they can increase the fund. So this is a very easy way to finance infrastructure where the country does not really need to borrow money, but uses its raw oil to finance these projects, but it needs the Chinese counterpart to guarantee the loans which the Chinese companies will use in Iraq. In 2022 on the same, by the way, this was sabotaged by the United States. The Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi was overthrown a few months after he returned from Beijing. There's a long story behind that. I met him personally. In 2022, I met the Iraqi Prime Minister when he was just was in office. And they asked me for my opinion. I proposed to build a national development bank in Iraq using 5% of the oil revenues as deposit, as capital, to finance industrial, agricultural, and even infrastructure projects. And this was modeled on the actually Korean Development Bank from the 1950s and 60s. So the countries in Africa, in Asia, they can leverage their own resources to create finances to build the infrastructure, to industry and agriculture and so on. So there are many creative ways of getting that done.
I'm happy Mukhtar is back as well. Can you take 30 seconds, Hussein, and elaborate on how still to this day the Iraqi oil money is being parked in the United States, and Iraq has to still ask for the blessings of America, even if it wants to buy, I don't know, Alstom or Siemens gas turbines. And that brings me back to Mukhtar and that conversation around the agency of the capital and the freedom of the capital. Can both of you weave into that a bit?
Yeah, the reason the Iraqi government cannot follow my idea is because they don't control the oil money. Because in 2003, when the US invaded Iraq and became the occupation power, it became responsible for all Iraqi resources. In May 22, United Nations resolution was passed, 1483, which was proposed by the United States to create the Iraqi Development Fund. The same day in the afternoon, President George W. Bush signed Executive Order 13033, which is called the protection of the Iraqi Development Fund and other assets in which Iraq has interest. So the American president, he became the custodian of all Iraqi oil money up to today. So when the Chinese buy oil from Iraq, 1 million barrels every day, they don't pay Iraq. They pay to a bank account in the Federal Reserve in New York, which is under the control of the American president. And then the Americans decide how the Iraqis use the money. Many people don't believe the story when I tell them. Therefore, I did research and I wrote articles about it, how the United States controls every dollar of Iraqi oil money until today.
Zeying, I was about to ask you this question when Mukhtar arrived. In light of the developments of Belt and Road, the Green Belt and Road, as a scholar, as a researcher, fully impartial, what would be the score of Green BRI and what are the areas of improvement in your opinion, briefly?
It is getting better with the engagements of private sector. The engagements of private sector, I think, is important in the sense that it actually has a lot more account. It also actually would, I think, materialize more expected outputs in reality. So that actually would also contribute to actually the financial stability we were talking about before. So we have seen actually, great improvements on the implementation of the Green BRI post-COVID in actually, currently. So this actually, I think, before perhaps low at 5, and now I would actually give score more than 5 and hopefully, get higher score. And I think this is also a project, where a lot of countries can share common interest on climate issue and environmental issues. Here, while people would say it is non-strategic area, so hopefully, less competition, less geopolitical conflicts. So perhaps here, hopefully China can have a lot more, outsiders involved as well in the future, in addition to BRI countries. So I think, it's hopeful.
Well, I think if I were to judge anybody and needed a fair assessment, I would call Zeying as well. That 5.5, 5.5 is very, very sober, very humble, but I'm sure people on the recipient end would say a little bit higher, but that's fine. We take it from you at 5.5. Mukhtar, my question, just very briefly, because I want to bring our session into a conclusion with your help and that of Hussein and Zeying. My question was that Hussein so eloquently shocked us at what's happening with the Iraqi oil, and most of our audience, I knew about it because I've read his great work. What are the safeguards for the GCC in this dance of 7 veils and the protection of their assets? I mean, from a military power, it's not like they're stronger than Russia, I'm afraid to say. From a fiscal power, it's not like they have any repercussions as such. And, how will they do this dance and how can they diversify into going in collaboration with China in some of these developments? And I want to bring Hussein very briefly as well. You wrote about this Operation Felix, Hussein, long time ago, and it was a vision similar to your ambitions for Iraq in Yemen. But what we're seeing is that at the moment, this very elements of the ports and the pieces of the puzzle are being shattered or thrown, upside down, which weaves again back into the Bab al-Mandab, the passage of tears. Are we going to see more tears in West Asia, the two of you? Whether it's fiscal or geopolitical tears. So
Mukhtar can start, yes.
Mukhtar,
well, look, I mean, I think to your earlier question, I think the only thing that the GCC countries can do is use the instruments that are available to them, okay? Not everything has to be funded in one currency, whatever currency that is. I mean, diversification is a mantra of the financial markets. So the ability to fund assets that are managed offshore can be done in multiple currencies, in multiple locations, and it would be wise to do so. Secondly, as these countries, i.e. the GCC, accrue RMB or value in other currencies, then they have to be able to deploy that somewhere. And I think that creates a level of financial maturity that gives them, the ability to mitigate what I would call expropriation risk, which is really what's happened elsewhere. Can you completely eliminate expropriation? No. But can you choose how you manage that risk? Yes. And that's through diversification, both geographically and by instrument and by tenor. So, that would be the way the financial markets would look at it.
Hussein?
Yeah, I really support this idea of diversification of currencies in trade, but also making the trade in oil and gas and other commodities very, very long term, like 25 years, 50 years contracts, not to be based on the daily fluctuations of which hurts both sides. So, but concerning the Yemeni plan, I did this research in 2018 together with the Yemeni Investment Authority. They asked me to present ideas about if there is peace in Yemen, how it could be rebuilt. And the basic idea is to use my knowledge in physical economics, not financial economics, to see how to unify the whole country's physical resources, human, geographical, water, minerals, and of course, its geographical location. And because of the geographical location of Yemen, it has been subject to geopolitical games where the country is being split, where some countries and some powers want to control the Aden port, others want to control the Hodeidah port, and so on and so forth. But my idea is that through using economics, we can both unify the country to avoid civil war, but also turn Yemen into a bridge rather than a wall and a threat by building infrastructure from Iran to Oman through Yemen to Africa, and then from Yemen northward to Saudi Arabia. So to unify the country with infrastructure domestically, but connecting it to the neighboring countries and becoming a bridge between Africa and Asia. So that was the idea. And I think the Chinese support these kinds of ideas, but they cannot find solutions for the geopolitical problem, which its source comes from somewhere else. And I think the Saudis and the Arabs have realized that they cannot solve the problem in Yemen through military means. The United States realized that recently. You cannot defeat the Yemenis with the weapons. So there should be a different way of incorporating Yemen into a more peaceful process. But as I said, there is no peace without economic development. And the Belt and Road Initiative is the name for that.
Now, I want each of you to take 1.5 minutes to bring your thoughts together. You can use it that way, or if you have any burning questions for any of your fellow panelists, you can ask that question. So either you go about for using this 1.5 minutes, and please be tight with it in the spirit of our next speakers, or ask a question from your fellow panelists. So your choice. Zeying, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. So since I focus on the green developments under BRI, and there has been these concerns about China is using this green development as strategic to expand its influence in Global South in competition with the US. Well, of course, you can't find such narrative in policy, right? Openly. But what do you guys think about this kind of assessment?
Hussein and Mukhtar, very short.
I would appreciate.
Shall I start first?
Yes,
yeah,
please,
well, I think I'm very, very optimistic about the future prospects for the Belt and Road Initiative because of the dynamic change which is taking place in the world. There are big threats to our civilization, as we've seen recently. Even the Ukraine war can develop into a global war, thermonuclear weapon. Everyone talking about nuclear wars. But there is a different way to go. And I hope, and that's why we are active in Sweden, because we want to convince the EU and even the United States to work with China instead of working against China on the Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, I would like to ask Mukhtar on the question of diversifying the financial resources, but to leverage the local financial resources, because there's a lot of financial resources in the Global South. There are thousands of centimillionaires in the Global South now, and billionaires, and in China, in ASEAN, and even in the Gulf countries and Africa, there is enormous financial wealth which is not being used for this development process.
Mukhtar, briefly, thank you.
Look, briefly on the first question, my simple answer, and it may sound very simple, is that let's distinguish between rhetoric and reality. Okay? If we manage by rhetoric, we won't get very far because people will always complain about something, somebody, somewhere. I think if we manage by reality, which is more green projects come out more continuously, which show more progress for more countries more frequently, that's it. Effectively, the question is answered. And that's the way I would go about it, because I think once you get caught in a rhetoric game, it never ends. Hussein, to your question, I think one of the great unutilized pools of liquidity in the global south is domestic currencies, domestic finance. We have reasonably sophisticated banking systems. There is a lot of liquidity, but the ability to deploy that liquidity, the ability to use it constructively, those channels and mechanisms haven't been created. We many years ago did a transaction in Indonesia where we were trying to convince the then Minister of Finance that there was an awful lot of people who wanted to invest via a certain instrument. And when they issued a sovereign bond, why don't they just create a retail component? That was sensationally successful because suddenly a lot of money came out from under the mattress. And I think many of these countries in the global south, that there's an opportunity to think, how do we incorporate local currency as part of the kind of cocktail mix of financing that is needed domestically? And then how does that flip over into providing, let's say, an earning stream for pension funds, okay, where you've got people who are saving and need a yield. So bringing those two components together would help a great deal. And there's a lot of work to be done on this.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much to all of our audience who joined us to begin with. I personally sincerely believe that when great distances cannot hinder the minds that seek harmony. And what I found today in our call was a lot of harmony from different areas of expertise. So I like to thank our audience. I like to thank you, the panel, Zeying, Hussein, Mukhtar. I also like to thank Chandran and Gift for continuing to give the gift of dialogue. There's one thing to be the gift, there's another thing to give the gift of dialogue to all of us and coming together. We were very proud to partner with Gift on this initiative at BRI Dialogues and Al-Sabah program and 360. But I would like to say that, Marco Polo said famously, I haven't told the half of what I saw when he came back from the Silk Road. I haven't told the half of what I saw. I believe we haven't seen even a quarter of what BRI can bring to the global south. And for that matter, may Gift and the wonderful team of Chandran and his colleagues bring us together for harmonious discussions and monitoring this trajectory of the Belt and Road Initiative. Thank you very much.